Today, I'm going to tell you a story so raw it aches, so intense it lingers, set deep in the unforgiving heart of the Old West, where dust hangs heavy in the air and survival is never promised. It's a land where danger and destiny cross paths, where one wrong step can cost everything. And it all begins with a single moment, a small, desperate escape that would ignite a chain of events no one could stop. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Arizona Territory, 1887. Ilara Voss stood on the warped wooden porch of her father's trading post, watching the sun sink low and set the far-off mountains ablaze in amber and burnished gold. A dry desert breeze worried at the hem of her plain cotton dress as she took in the land that had shaped her for the last 5 years. Dust, stone, and endless sky. At 22, she had learned to live with the frontier's hard beauty, though some quiet part of her still missed the manners and soft edges of the East she'd known before her mother's death. "I'll be back inside 2 weeks, Ilara." Her father's voice came back to her, a promise spoken just 3 days earlier. Roic Voss had looked worn and uneasy as he swung into the saddle for the supply run to Tucson. "Keep the books clean, and don't give Jameson another cent. That man's buried in debt already." The memory drew a faint smile as Ilara brushed wind-blown strands of pale hair from her face. Since coming west, the trading post had become her whole world, a crossroads where dust-reach folk, soldiers, and the occasional peaceful native trader crossed paths every day. Roic had taught her to stand firm without cruelty, to deal straight with anyone who stepped through the door. Those lessons had kept the place running during his long absences. As the last light stretched thin across the yard, Ilara sorted tomorrow's chores in her mind. The supply barrels needed refilling. Several cavalry wives from the nearby fort were waiting on bolts of fabric due to arrive with her father. Small, ordinary worries. Steady, familiar, marking the rhythm of frontier life. She turned toward the door, then stopped. The world had gone strangely quiet. Crickets fell silent. Even the restless wind seemed to pause. A cold shiver traced her spine despite the lingering heat. Something was wrong. Her gaze swept the property, from the small corral where 2 horses grazed, to the brush line where lengthening shadows pooled thick and dark. Roic's warnings echoed in her head. Stay sharp, especially when you're alone. The frontier wore a civilized face now and then, but danger never truly left. It struck like lightning. As the sun vanished behind the peaks, dark shapes rose from the brush. Red ash men, their faces marked for war, moving fast and sure toward the post. Ilara locked in place as arrows sliced past her, slamming into the porch beams. She cried out and staggered back inside, throwing the door shut. Through the window she watched fire burst from the barn, sparks spiraling into the dusk. Ike Rowan, the old hand Roic had hired years ago, stepped from the bunkhouse and fell almost at once, an arrow buried deep in his chest. "God help me," Ilara breathed, snatching her father's shotgun from behind the counter. Her hands shook as she loaded it, knowing how little one weapon meant against so many. Roic had never taught her to give in. The door exploded inward as 2 warriors forced their way through. Ilara fired once. The blast thundered in the tight space. One man dropped back. The other kept coming. She swung the shotgun hard, the stock cracking against his skull, and ran for the rear door with the seconds she'd bought. Outside, the night had erupted into chaos. The trading post burned from end to end, smoke boiling up into the dark sky. Ilara dropped behind a water trough, heart hammering, eyes searching for a way out. If she reached the paddock, she might outrun them. Might. That was when she saw him. Through flame and smoke stood a figure apart from the rest. Taller, still, commanding the scene without effort. Even at a distance, his presence cut through the fire like a blade. A lone eagle feather trailed from his long black hair, and dark, deliberate markings cut across his bare chest. Signs of rank, of command. This was no common warrior. This was a chief. Their gazes locked across the burning yard, and the world seemed to pause. Fire crackled. Wood collapsed. Yet all sound dulled as Alara Voss found herself unable to turn away from him. His eyes were sharp and deep, carrying intelligence, restraint, and something nameless that struck straight through her fear and settled in her bones. For Kelton, the Apache chief spoken of in whispers along the frontier, the chaos around him narrowed to a single figure, a woman with sunlit hair and a gaze that refused to break. Something shifted inside him, not thought, not reason, recognition, sudden and absolute. His heart pounded as if he had crossed miles at a run, though his body remained perfectly still. A burning beam crashed to the ground nearby, shattering the moment. As the Red Ash men turned toward the noise, Alara moved. She slipped from the shadows and vanished into the deepening dark. The chief's stare followed her, etched into her memory like a brand. With only the clothes on her back and a small hunting knife hidden in her boot, a gift from Roic Voss, one she had always thought improper to carry, Alara fled into the merciless desert, knowing pursuit would come. Behind her, Kelton watched her go, conflict tightening in his chest. He lifted his hand to signal the hunt, then stopped. His fingers lowered, slow and deliberate. He would take this trail himself. "The woman is escaping," one of the warriors said in their tongue, confusion plain in his voice. "She won't go far," Kelton replied, his tone calm, betraying nothing. "The land will bring her back to us." As the Red Ash men continued stripping the post for supplies and horses, Kelton remained where he was, staring into the darkness that had swallowed the woman whole. In 36 winters, he had never known a moment like this, never felt as though the Great Spirit had reached through an enemy's eyes to touch his soul. Night settled fully as Alara drove herself onward, fueled by terror and stubborn resolve. By daylight, the desert was stark and beautiful. By night, it became a maze of threat and shadow. Every rustle set her pulse racing. Snake, coyote, or worse, silent footsteps closing in. She clung to her father's teachings. Take the high ground when you can, mark the land, follow dry washes to blur a trail. Under stars and a thin sliver of moon, the knowledge felt thin and fragile. Near midnight, her strength finally drained away. Her throat burned, her legs shook with every step. She crawled beneath an overhanging rock and rested for a breath, listening hard for pursuit. In the stillness, the truth crashed down on her. Her home was gone. Ike Rowan lay dead. Her father would return to ashes, perhaps believing she had been taken or killed, and she was alone in one of the harshest lands on earth, hunted by the Red Ash men. A sob rose, sharp and sudden, but Alara swallowed it back. Tears cost water, and water meant life. She closed her eyes, and his face returned to her. The Apache chief. Those steady eyes that had seemed to see straight through her. Why hadn't he ordered the chase at once? And why did the memory of him stir something that wasn't fear? "Stupid," she whispered to the empty night. "Just exhaustion, that's all." After granting herself only a handful of minutes, Alara Voss forced her aching body back into motion. Water had become the only thought that mattered. Without it, the desert would finish her long before the Red Ash men ever could. Far behind her, Kelton dropped to one knee beside her trail, his fingertips brushing the disturbed sand with practiced care. Few men alive could read the land as he did. The skill had earned him his reputation as both hunter and chief, but tonight it served a quieter purpose. "She travels with intent," he murmured in his own tongue. Not like one running blind with fear. He had sent the rest of the Red Ash men on without him, saying only that he would scout ahead alone. Tovan, his second, had questioned the choice with a look, though no words passed between them. A chief did not usually track a single escaped captive, least of all a woman. Kelton himself could not name the pull that guided him. The raid had gone well. Horses, ammunition, and supplies now belonged to his people hidden in the high country. Everything necessary for survival had been taken. And still, here he was, following the path of one white woman as if her trail carried weight beyond reason. As night thinned into the first gray hint of dawn, he paused near a jagged rock shelf. Her sign spoke clearly now. A dragging step, a palm pressed to stone where she had nearly fallen. She would not live another day without water. With that certainty, he changed course. Instead of closing the distance between them, he angled toward a narrow spring hidden among the rocks, a place known only to those who had walked this land since childhood. If she made it through the morning, thirst would lead her there without fail. That was where he would wait. That was where they would meet again. Not as hunter and prey, not as chief and captive, but as two lives pulled together by something neither fully understood. The sun climbed fast, pouring merciless heat across the Arizona desert until even the air seemed to burn. Ilara managed only a few more hours before her strength failed. She collapsed beneath a shallow rock overhang, lips split and bleeding, tongue swollen, skin scorched raw along her face and throat. She knew the truth with cold clarity. She was dying. Without water, no one survived this land for long. A day, maybe two, if luck and shade showed mercy. Yet something inside her refused to give way. Perhaps it was Roic Voss's stubborn blood, passed down through years of hard lessons. Perhaps it was the simple defiance of the human spirit, or perhaps something quieter, unnamed. The memory of those eyes returned to her. The chief standing in the firelight. The look that had reached past fear and touched something deeper. Holding that image, Ilara dragged herself upright again. She would move while shadows still clung to the ground before the sun rose high enough to turn the desert into a living furnace. That was when she felt it. A change in the air. Not cool, but damp. Almost imagined. Her body answered before her mind could argue, turning toward the faint promise of moisture. Between two boulders, half hidden and easily missed, lay a small spring. Water seeped from the stone, forming a shallow basin no larger than a washbowl before vanishing back into the earth. Ilara dropped to her knees beside it, gripping her hands together to stop herself from plunging her face into the pool. Her father's warning cut through the haze. Drink too fast, and you might never drink again. She cupped the water instead, lifting it carefully to her lips. Each small swallow felt like salvation. So consumed was she by the relief that she failed to sense the shift behind her. Only when she leaned forward to drink again did she see it, the reflection in the trembling surface of the pool. A tall figure stood motionless at her back. Kelton. Ilara spun hard, stumbling backward as her hand went for the knife hidden in her boot. Her strength failed her at the same instant. Dizziness surged, the ground seemed to tilt, and blackness crept in from the edges of her sight. The last image she carried with her was the Apache chief stepping toward her, something unexpectedly gentle softening his expression. When awareness returned, she lay in the cool shadow of a larger boulder, a damp cloth resting against her brow. Night had fallen again. Nearby, a small fire burned low, nearly smokeless. Across the faint glow sat Kelton, his dark eyes catching the firelight as he watched her in silence. "You are stronger than most," he said at last, his English rough but clear. "Many would have died out there." Alara tried to push herself upright, confusion tangling with exhaustion. Why had this feared chief followed her alone? Why was she still breathing? "Why?" she rasped. The words scraped raw from her throat. Kelton seemed to hear more than she asked. He studied her face for a long moment before speaking. "I have fought the white man's armies for 15 summers," he said evenly. "I have seen bravery in battle and terror at the end." He leaned forward, shadows moving across his features. "But I have never felt what passed between us when our eyes met." He paused, as if weighing his own words. "The ash circle speaks of spirits that recognize each other, even when born enemies. I do not yet understand it, but I know it cannot be ignored." Alara stared at him. This man, meant to embody everything she feared, was voicing the same unease that had followed her since the fire. "What happens now?" she asked, steadying her voice. Kelton rose in one smooth motion, his height commanding even to someone raised among frontier men. "Now you choose," he said. "Return to your people, who will soon search the ruins of your home, or come with me, to learn what the Great Spirit has placed between us." He extended his hand across the fire. "I offer no chains, only protection, and the chance to see beyond what you were taught." Beneath the stars, with the desert stretching endless and silent around them, Alara Voss faced the most decisive moment of her life. Every sensible thought urged her to run, to cling to the safety of her own world. Yet when she looked into Kelton's eyes, she did not see a monster of frontier tales. She saw resolve, honor, a man who had tracked her not to end her life, but to understand it. Her fingers shook as she reached out and took his hand. The journey beneath the moon bore no resemblance to anything Alara had known. Kelton moved as if the desert belonged to him, while she struggled to keep pace, her weakened body protesting with every step. After the third stumble, he halted. Without a word, he drew dried meat from a pouch and held it out. "Eat. It will give you strength." She accepted it warily. The taste was strange, rich, and grounding against her empty stomach. "Where are you taking me?" she asked at last, breaking the long silence. "To safety," he said, and continued on. As they walked, Alara studied him. Guide or captor, she still could not decide. Moonlight washed over his copper-toned skin and flashed along the blade at his belt, but it was the calm authority in his movements that held her attention most. He carried himself like a man long used to giving orders, and being obeyed without question. After a long stretch of silence, Alara Voss finally spoke. "Why did you come after me yourself?" she asked carefully. "A chief has greater concerns than one woman." Kelton did not slow, but something in the set of his shoulders shifted. "I saw something," he said at last, his voice low beneath the night wind. "Something I have never seen before." She frowned. "What do you mean?" He stopped and turned to face her, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. "When our eyes met across the fire, the Great Spirit spoke." He held her gaze. "I do not yet know what was said." Before Alara could answer, his body went rigid. His hand slid toward the knife at his belt, and in one swift motion he drew her behind a boulder. "Do not move," he whispered, his breath warm against her ear. A moment later she heard it, the dull, steady rhythm of hooves on hard ground. "Riders," she breathed. Iron spur riders, Kelton confirmed quietly, every muscle coiled tight. A patrol. Ilara's heart surged. Soldiers meant rescue, a road back to her people. Yet something stopped her from calling out. Perhaps the memory of what he had said about soldiers bringing ruin to his people, or perhaps something deeper she did not yet understand. The patrol passed less than 50 yards away. 6 men riding in formation, their dark shapes etched against the star-lit sky. Ilara held her breath until they crested a distant ridge and vanished. In the silence that followed, Kelton's eyes searched hers, waiting. He had not held her, had not silenced her. The choice had been hers. "They would have killed you," she said simply. Surprise flickered across his face, followed by something close to respect. He nodded once, took her hand, and led her onward. By dawn, they reached a narrow canyon, its entrance barely wide enough for one person at a time. Inside, the walls opened into a hidden hollow where cottonwoods grew along a clear creek, an oasis carved into the wilderness. "We rest here," Kelton said, guiding her beneath a rock overhang that offered shade. Exhaustion finally claimed her. Ilara sank to the ground and watched as he built a small, nearly smokeless fire, then dipped a hollowed gourd into the creek and brought it to her. "Drink slowly," he said. As she sipped the cool water, dawn crept into the canyon. In the soft light, she studied his face, the lines of weariness at his eyes, the long scar running from temple to jaw. "Your people," she said carefully. "Where are they?" "Safe," he answered, his tone closing the matter. "My father will be searching for me," Ilara said after a pause. "When Roic Voss returns and finds the post burned, he will believe you dead," Kelton finished. "Perhaps that is kinder." Anger flared sharp and sudden. "Kinder?" she snapped. "To let him grieve for nothing?" Kelton's expression did not change. "What life waits for you if you return? Your home is ash, and any white woman who has lived among my people—" He let the rest go unsaid. The truth struck hard. Ilara had heard the stories. Women marked forever, never fully accepted again. Her jaw tightened. "So I am your prisoner after all," she said bitterly. "No." Kelton's reply came without hesitation. "You are under my protection. That is not the same." "Protection from what?" Ilara Voss challenged quietly. "From your red ash men, who might see me as spoils of war? From the Dustreach folk, who would call me ruined? From soldiers who would use me to track you down and then cast me aside?" His dark gaze held hers, unflinching. "From a world that has no place for either of us as we truly are." The blunt truth in his words left her with nothing to argue. This man, this enemy she had been taught to fear, was offering her more dignity than she would likely find among her own people. They remained in the shelter of the canyon as the day wore on. Kelton left for a time and returned with 2 rabbits, which he cleaned and cooked with practiced efficiency. The meal, simple as it was, tasted better than anything Ilara could remember. Afterward, she nodded toward the scar cutting across his face. "That mark, how did you get it?" Kelton's fingers rose to it without thought. "My first fight with the Blue Coats," he said. "I was 17 winters." "And you've been fighting ever since?" A shadow passed over his features. "The Apache way is being broken," he said evenly. "Our hunting lands taken, our people pushed into dead ground, our children sent to schools where they beat our language from their mouths." His voice stayed controlled, but Ilara heard the anger beneath it. "What would you have me do?" she asked, the question surprising even herself. For the first time, she looked at his people not as passing customers at her father's post, nor as the monsters of frontier stories, but as men and women struggling simply to survive. "I don't know," she admitted. Kelton studied her, as if weighing her answer. "Few of your kind would even ask." As evening settled, Ilara felt drawn to the creek. She knelt beside it, staring at her reflection in the still water. 5 days in the desert had carved their toll. Sunburned skin, hair snarled with dust, torn and stained clothes. Yet her eyes had changed. There was something awake in them now, something she hadn't carried before. Soft footsteps warned her of Kelton's approach. He crouched beside her, his reflection joining hers in the water. "The desert changes those who live through it," he said, as if hearing her thoughts. "It strips away what is false." "And what remains?" Ilara asked, meeting his gaze in the mirrored surface. "Truth." He dipped his hand into the creek, breaking the image with spreading ripples. "Sometimes painful," he said. "Always worth knowing." They sat together in silence as the shadows stretched long. Ilara realized she felt at ease beside him, a man who should have been her enemy, yet had shown her nothing but restraint and respect. "Tell me about your people," she said at last, not as my father's books describe them, as they truly are. Something like surprise crossed Kelton's eyes, followed by careful approval. He began to speak, his low voice shaping images of Apache life, their bond with the land, their ceremonies, their losses as white settlements pressed closer. He told her how he had become war chief, not only through strength in battle, but through judgment in council. "My people are proud," he said as the first stars appeared above the canyon. "Perhaps too proud to see that the old ways cannot remain untouched. Yet the paths offered by the white man destroy what makes us Apache." "There has to be another way," Ilara said softly. Kelton's expression hardened. "Those who search for it are branded traitors by both sides." The words lingered in the night, heavy with lived truth. Sensing that he counted himself among them, Ilara Voss felt the turn of his gaze. "And your people?" he asked quietly. "What truths do they hide behind church steeples and cavalry forts?" The bluntness caught her off guard, yet she answered with the same candor. She spoke of the East's double standards, how sermons of mercy often masked hunger for power. She told him of her father's disillusionment after Anselma Voss died, how Roic Voss withdrew to the frontier where rules were fewer, if harsher. "He taught me to see people as they are," she said, "not by race or station. It set me apart from other settler women." "Different," Kelton echoed, "yet still of your people, as I am of mine." As night deepened, the temperature fell sharply, a desert truth that still caught Ilara by surprise. She shivered. Without a word, Kelton rose, took a blanket from his sparse gear, and settled it around her shoulders. The simple care struck her deeply, attention without demand. "Thank you," she said, meaning far more than the warmth. He inclined his head, understanding in his eyes. He sat nearby, close enough to speak, distant enough to honor space. "Tomorrow we move," he said. "This place is safe, but only for a time." "Where will we go?" Ilara asked. Kelton weighed the question. "There is a place in the mountains where my people gather when danger grows. Few whites know it." "You would take me there?" she asked, surprised. "Would they accept me?" A complex look crossed his face. "Some will not. But I am chief. My word still carries weight." He paused, studying her in the firelight. "You have earned trust by not calling out to the patrol, by seeing me as a man, not only an enemy." The quiet statement carried its own gravity. In a matter of days, lines that once felt unbreakable had shifted, from fear to wary respect, from enemies to something neither could yet name. As Elara drifted toward sleep beneath the borrowed blanket and a sky stitched with stars, questions crowded her thoughts. What awaited her among his people? Could she truly live among them, even for a while? And her father, would she see him again? Beneath these worries stirred something deeper, more unsettling. What she felt for Kelton defied reason and upbringing alike. It wasn't romance as she knew it. It was simpler and heavier, a recognition between kindred spirits despite everything that should have kept them apart. Across the dying fire, Kelton watched Elara's face soften in sleep. She continued to surprise him, meeting terror with courage, prejudice with understanding. She had endured the desert with a resilience few possessed, and she had met his gaze without flinching from the truth there. In all his seasons of war, Kelton had never encountered a woman like Elara Voss. He felt certain of one thing: the Great Spirit had set her on his path with purpose. What that purpose was remained unclear, a question that unsettled him even as it drew him forward. One truth stood firm: keeping her safe would take far more than strength of arm or skill with a blade. It would force him to challenge the customs of his own people and to face the unfamiliar stirring within his own heart. With those thoughts heavy in his mind, Kelton slipped into the light sleep of a seasoned warrior, resting just enough while remaining alert to danger. Tomorrow would demand decisions he could not yet see. For this single night, they had claimed a rare stillness in a world that offered little mercy. Dawn spilled gold into the canyon. Elara woke to find Kelton already moving, scanning the ground and ridgelines for any sign of approach. Every motion spoke of long habit, of a man never fully at rest. "We leave within the hour," he said when he noticed her stirring. He handed her a small bundle. "Eat." It was dried berries mixed with crushed nuts. Simple trail fare, but sustaining. As they prepared to go, Elara felt an unexpected hesitation. The canyon had been shelter, a place where words had begun to bridge the divide between their lives. Beyond it waited uncertainty, the judgment of Kelton's people, the risks of travel, and the confusion of emotions she barely understood. "Are you ready?" he asked, his keen eyes studying her as if reading what she did not say. Elara squared her shoulders, drawing on the resolve that had carried her through fire and desert. "Yes," she answered. They passed through the narrow canyon mouth and stepped back into the open land. Both sensed they were crossing more than stone and shadow. They were entering a future neither could foresee, bound by circumstance and a connection that defied the bitter history between their worlds. The desert opened before them, stark and beautiful in the morning light. Somewhere beyond its wavering horizon lay answers neither had yet shaped, about themselves, about each other, and about whether common ground could exist in a land ruled by fear and hatred. The journey to the Apache stronghold lasted 3 careful days. Kelton guided them along hidden trails, steering clear of open routes where iron spur riders or wandering dust-reach folk might appear. For Elara, the passage became a revelation, not only of the land's raw beauty, but of the man leading her through it. Kelton's understanding of the desert ran deeper than familiarity. He read it the way Elara once read ledgers and letters, finding water where she saw only cracked earth, naming edible plants among what looked like lifeless scrub. More surprising still was his readiness to teach her, explaining roots, leaves, and the signs left by animals. "Your people see this land as an enemy to be conquered," he said as they rested beneath a rock shelf on the second day, heat pressing down around them. The Apache see it as a hard teacher, one that rewards respect and punishes carelessness. "And what am I to the desert?" Elara asked, wiping sweat from her brow. The faintest smile touched Kelton's mouth. "A fast learner." By the 3rd day, the land began to rise. The air cooled, trees replaced scrub, and Alara felt the change in her bones. They were close now. Kelton grew increasingly alert, pausing often to listen or study the ground ahead. After one such stop, Alara Voss spoke quietly. "Your people patrol these mountains?" He nodded once. "And mine have watched them for centuries." He looked toward the ridgeline. "We are nearing a place few whites have ever seen, and none have left to speak of." The weight of his words settled heavily on her. "Will your Red Ash men see me as a threat?" she asked. Kelton met her gaze. "You remain under my protection." He hesitated, choosing his words with care. "But it would be foolish to walk alone. Some wounds between our peoples run too deep for reason to mend." As the afternoon shadows stretched across the slope, they crested a ridge, and Alara caught her first sight of the hidden encampment. Tucked into a guarded valley, dozens of wickiups, rounded shelters of brush and hide, stood in clustered circles. Thin threads of smoke rose from cooking fires, set against sheer cliffs that protected the camp on three sides. A narrow stream cut through the valley floor, glinting in the light. "It's beautiful," she whispered, moved despite herself. This was no crude camp from FrontierTales, but an ordered community, placed with care for defense and water alike. "It is the last true home my people have," Kelton said softly. "Each season, more are driven onto the reservation. Soon, perhaps, even this will be gone." They stood in silence, Alara taking in the valley and the sorrow in his voice. Then Kelton motioned, and they began the descent. Their arrival drew instant notice. Children were the first to spot them, shouting in Apache and racing toward the center of the camp. Women paused mid-task. Men reached for weapons. Within moments, a crowd gathered to witness an unheard-of sight, their war chief returning with a white woman walking freely at his side. Kelton lifted his hand, speaking swiftly in Apache. Alara couldn't follow the words, but the meaning was clear. Command layered with explanation. Some faces showed open hostility, others curiosity. Among the elders, a guarded neutrality suggested judgment withheld. A tall warrior stepped forward, his presence nearly matching Kelton's own. This was Tovin, the chief's second. The two spoke in low, urgent tones, glancing at Alara as they did. She stood straight, refusing to shrink under the stairs. Roic Voss had taught her that dignity earned respect, and she sensed these people would recognize strength more than fear. At last, Kelton turned to her. "You will stay in the dwelling of Sarah, the medicine woman," he said. "She knows some English and will help you learn our ways." An elderly woman had approached during the exchange. Despite her years, Sarah stood tall, her face carved with deep lines of experience. Her eyes were sharp and measuring as they took Alara in. "This one survived the desert," Sarah said in careful English. "That is no small thing for a white woman." "She is under my protection," Kelton stated, final and firm. Sarah inclined her head. "Then come. You will need food and rest before the ash circle gathers." As Alara Voss followed the elderly woman toward one of the larger wickiups, she felt the press of countless eyes tracking her every step. She was a curiosity, an intrusion, perhaps even a danger among them. Only Kelton's authority stood between her and open hostility, a truth that brought equal parts comfort and unease. Inside Sarah's dwelling, the air was cool, scented with drying herbs hung in bundles from the curved supports. Sarah motioned for Alara to sit on a woven mat, then turned to prepare a simple meal, corn cakes and strips of dried meat softened in broth. "Ulzana says your eyes met across the fire," Sarah said suddenly, her back still turned. "That the Great Spirit spoke." Alara hesitated, unsure how to answer such a direct acknowledgement of what she and Kelton had scarcely dared to name. "Something happened," she said at last. "Something I can't explain." Sarah turned, her gaze sharp and searching. "The old stories speak of souls that recognize one another across many lives. It is rare, but not unknown." She set the wooden bowl before Elara. "But between Apache and White," she added quietly, "that has not been told before." "I didn't choose this," Elara said, a need to defend herself rising in her chest. "Nor did he," Sarah replied, her voice unexpectedly gentle. "The Great Spirit chooses for reasons beyond us. We only walk the path set before our feet." Before Elara could respond, raised voices carried through the thin walls, sharp, heated, unmistakably confrontational. Sarah's expression darkened. "The ash circle gathers sooner than expected. Some are angered by your presence." Elara pushed the untouched food aside. "Should I go to them? Explain myself?" "No." Sarah's answer was swift. "This is for Kelton to face. A woman, especially a white woman, would not be received there." Trapped by circumstance, Elara could only wait, her thoughts spiraling as decisions were made beyond her reach. Through the entrance, she glimpsed warriors assembling in the center of camp, their stances rigid, voices rising with tension. "What are they saying?" she asked. Sarah listened, her brow furrowing. "Some demand you be sent away. Others wish to hold you as a prisoner, to trade for Apache captives." She paused, then added softly, "A few say your presence is a bad sign, that only your death can remove it." Cold washed through Elara, but she forced herself to remain still. "And Kelton?" she asked. "He speaks of signs and visions," Sarah said, "of the danger in ignoring the Great Spirit when it speaks in unfamiliar ways." She shook her head. "He asks much of men who have buried wives and children lost to iron spur riders and dust-reach folk." As the argument outside grew louder, Elara felt fear tighten in her chest. Not only for herself, but for Kelton. He was risking his authority, perhaps even his place as chief, for her. A woman he barely knew, from a people who had taken so much from his own. "I should never have come," she whispered. "I've only brought him trouble." Sarah rested a weathered hand on her arm, the touch steady and reassuring. "Trouble comes to all who walk a new path," she said quietly. "The question is whether that path leads to something worth the cost." A sudden hush swept across the camp. Through the opening of the dwelling, Elara Voss saw Kelton standing at the center of the gathering, his stance rigid, authority etched into every line of him. He spoke briefly, his tone allowing no challenge, then turned and walked straight toward Sarah's wickiup. He stepped inside, his face controlled though tension showed in his shoulders. "The council is divided," he said without preamble. "You may remain, for now, but under strict terms. You will not leave this area without escort, and you will make yourself useful to the camp." Relief rushed through Elara. "Thank you. I'll do whatever is required." "It was not an easy decision," Kelton said quietly, lowering his voice so only she and Sarah could hear. "Tovan and the younger Red Ash men argued for you to be driven away, or worse. Only the elders who still honor signs and visions shifted the balance." "What happens now?" Elara asked. "Now," Sarah said firmly, "you learn our ways. You show respect for the Apache people. Give them reason to see more than an enemy." Kelton nodded. "I leave at dawn to watch the movements of the Iron Spur Riders. They have drawn closer to our refuge these past weeks. I will return in 3 days." His eyes locked onto Elara's. "Can you endure among my people until then?" The question carried more than one meaning. Endurance of body, of spirit, of scrutiny. "Yes," she answered simply, meeting his gaze. Something like approval flickered in his eyes. With a brief nod to Sarah, he turned and left, leaving Alara alone with the weight of what lay ahead. The days that followed tested her in ways she had never imagined. True to her word, Alara threw herself into the life of the camp, offering help wherever it might be accepted. Many of the women refused her at first, turning away when she approached. Still, she persisted, collecting firewood, hauling water from the stream, scraping hides for tanning. Sarah became an unexpected ally, teaching her Apache customs and translating when needed. The medicine woman seemed to have taken Alara on as a kind of experiment, perhaps seeing in her a bridge to the white world pressing ever closer. "Your hands were soft when you arrived," Sarah remarked on the second day, examining Alara's blistered palms after hours of grinding corn. "Now they begin to learn real work." "I worked at the trading post," Alara protested gently. "Store work," Sarah replied, with a dismissive click of her tongue. "Not life work?" There was no cruelty in her voice, only the plain truth of someone shaped by hardship. Slowly, the camp began to thaw. The children were first, as children always were, watching from a distance, giggling when Alara noticed them, then edging closer until they dared to touch her sun-bright hair in open curiosity. A few of the women followed. A silent demonstration of a better way to complete a task. A shared bowl of stew at dusk, a brief nod in passing. Not everyone softened. Tovan and those who sided with him kept their distance, their gazes sharp and unwelcoming. Alara felt their scrutiny constantly, measuring, waiting, as if for a single mistake that would justify the mistrust they refused to relinquish. On the afternoon of the third day, as Alara Voss helped a young mother named Myra hang strips of meat to dry, she noticed a sudden shift along the camp's edge. Warriors were gathering, weapons in hand, their movements sharp and watchful. "What's happening?" Alara asked. Mire's English had improved through days of shared work. Mira's face tightened. "Scouts see dust, many horses, maybe soldiers." Alara's pulse spiked. Iron spur riders, this close to the hidden camp, meant only one thing. Either the Apache sanctuary had been discovered, or the patrol was dangerously near. The truth landed hard. If soldiers found this place, there would be blood. Women and children would suffer alongside the Red Ash men. And Kelton, due to return today, could ride straight into a trap. A terrible choice rose before her. She could stay silent, protecting the fragile acceptance she had earned. Or she could act, using what she knew of cavalry tactics from years behind her father's trading post, to help people who still questioned her presence. The decision came faster than she expected. Alara moved with purpose toward the gathered warriors, brushing past Myra's warning hand. Tovan stood at the center, issuing swift commands. He stopped when he saw her approach, suspicion hardening his features. "I can help," Alara said clearly, holding his gaze. "I know how cavalry units move in these mountains." "So you can signal them," a younger warrior snapped. "Lead them here?" Alara shook her head. "If I meant to betray you, I would have done it when the patrol passed us days ago." She turned back to Tovan, recognizing him as the authority in Kelton's absence. "Your people have shown me mistrust and kindness, but there are children here, women who've done nothing to deserve cavalry justice." For a long moment, Tovan searched her face, weighing truth against risk. Then he gave a short nod and motioned her forward. Over the next hour, Alara shared everything she knew: how patrols searched, how their horses faltered on steep ground, which routes they favored when tracking a suspected camp. Skepticism slowly gave way to reluctant respect, as her knowledge proved practical and precise. Together, they formed a plan. False trails leading away from the valley, signs planted to suggest the area had been abandoned, careful use of terrain to hide the true sanctuary. As the warriors moved to carry it out, Tovin stepped closer to Alara. "You help us against your own kind," he said. Not a question. "I help people who sheltered me," Alara replied. "People whose only crime is wanting to live their own way." Something shifted in his expression. Not acceptance, but the first crack in certainty. He nodded once and turned to lead his men. Alara returned to the heart of the camp, where women gathered supplies and soothed frightened children. She joined them without hesitation, working in quiet rhythm. No longer an observer, now part of their fight to endure. As dusk settled, a lone figure appeared on the ridge above the valley, Kelton, returning as promised. He grasped the situation in an instant, exchanging a few sharp words with the sentries, before moving straight to where Tovan waited. From where she helped Mire tie off a bundle of medicinal herbs, Alara Voss watched the two men speak in low, urgent tones, Tovan gesturing more than once in her direction. Kelton's face remained controlled, but his stance betrayed both surprise and something close to approval. Later, as the camp settled into a tense watchfulness, Kelton sought Alara out near Sarah's dwelling. Fatigue had finally caught her, the strain of the day weighing heavy. "Tovan says you helped shape our defense," he said, lowering himself beside her. Alara nodded, suddenly unsure how he would judge her choice. "It felt right." "It was right," he replied, calm and certain. "And unexpected." She studied him. "And what does your second-in-command think of me now?" A faint curve touched his mouth. "A question he has not yet answered. A puzzle." "As do I," Alara said quietly. The next morning, the Iron Spur riders passed within a mile of the camp, following precisely the false trail Alara had predicted they would trust. By midday, they were gone, dust hanging in the air long after they rode back toward their fort, never knowing how close they had come. The moment changed everything. Alara was no longer merely the woman under Kelton's protection. She had chosen the safety of the Apache over her own escape. Even Tovan, still guarded, now greeted her with a brief nod of respect when they crossed paths. The women drew her in more fully, sharing work and words, asking, through gestures and broken English, about life among the Dust Reach folk. Most telling was the shift with Kelton himself. The careful distance he had kept, out of respect, caution, or uncertainty, began to fade. They spoke more easily now, trading thoughts as days passed. One evening, walking beside the stream that cut through the camp, Kelton asked the question she had known would come. "Do you regret not returning to your people when you could?" Alara answered slowly. "I miss my father. I fear his grief, believing me dead." She paused, searching for honesty. "But I've seen things here I never expected. Strength, dignity, families holding together despite everything taken from you." She met his gaze. "The stories settlers tell about the Apache are wrong, or incomplete." Kelton inclined his head. "And the stories my people tell of whites are the same. Truth is rarely found in an enemy's tale." They walked in silence as the sun dropped low, shadows stretching across the valley. "What happens now?" Alara asked at last, echoing the question she had first asked days earlier in the hidden canyon. Kelton stopped and turned to her, his voice lower, more personal than before. "Now we acknowledge what has taken root between us, what began when our eyes met across the burning trading post." Alara's heart answered before she spoke. What bound them grew stronger with each passing day, shifting from wary curiosity to mutual respect, and then into something deeper that neither could deny any longer. Alara had tried to explain it away, blaming the danger, the desert, the strangeness of how their paths had crossed. but the truth refused to loosen its grip. The Great Spirit, Kelton believed, sometimes placed souls together in ways no one could foresee. Kelton continued softly, lifting his hand to her face, his fingers brushing her cheek with unexpected tenderness. I have fought the white man for 15 summers. I have lost kin, friends, parts of myself to that fight. He held her gaze. Yet when I saw you standing in the firelight, something inside me remembered peace. The warmth of his touch sent a shiver through Ilara, not of fear, but of recognition. An answering truth that rose beyond the rules others had drawn between them. I don't know what this means, she whispered, or how it could ever work. Nor do I, Kelton admitted, and the vulnerability in his voice struck her harder than any declaration. But to turn away from it would be to turn away from the Great Spirit's voice. As the final light of day bathed the land in gold, Ilara made her choice. She stepped closer and laid her hand over his heart. Then we listen, she said quietly, and we walk the path together. The kiss they shared was gentle, uncertain. A careful crossing into ground both had been taught was forbidden. Yet in that fragile moment, something shifted, not only between a man and a woman, but between the worlds they came from. It was only a beginning, delicate and untested, shadowed by dangers neither could yet measure. Still, as twilight gathered around them, Ilara knew with sudden clarity that whatever lay ahead, they would face it not as enemies, nor merely as allies, but as two souls who had recognized each other across the deep scars of history and hatred. And in that recognition lay the first fragile seeds of a future neither could have imagined when their eyes first met across the flames of a burning trading post. The weeks that followed reshaped Ilara's life in ways she could never have foreseen. What had begun as captivity had slowly turned into belonging. What had first felt like an inexplicable pull toward Kelton had grown into a bond neither of them could yet name, but both felt deeply. The Apache camp, once so alien and intimidating, became familiar. Ilara learned the cadence of daily life, the women's work of preparing food, curing hides, shaping what was needed to survive, the warriors' rhythms of hunting, scouting, and guarding their hidden refuge. The children learning both hard skills and the stories that anchored their people. Most surprising of all was the place she found for herself. Her knowledge of medicinal plants, first learned from her mother's books, and later expanded through years at the trading post, made her useful to Sarah. The old medicine woman, once wary, now treated Ilara as something between an apprentice and a daughter, determined to pass on what she knew of Apache healing ways. "Your hands are meant for this," Sarah said one afternoon, as they prepared a poultice for a feverish child. They listened to the plants. Not everyone shared that acceptance. Though many in the camp had come to tolerate, or even value, Ilara, a hard core of resentment remained. It was led by Drake, a warrior whose family had been slaughtered by iron spur riders during a raid on a former camp. To him, no white person could ever be anything but an enemy. "He watches you with snake eyes," Mire warned one day, as they worked side by side. "Be careful when Kelton is away." The warning was unnecessary. Ilara had felt Drake's hatred from the moment she arrived. She had learned to stay alert whenever he was near. Still, she refused to show fear, meeting his stares with calm resolve that only seemed to fuel his anger. Kelton was not blind to the tension. Though his authority as chief remained intact, if anything, reinforced by the clever evasion of the iron spur riders, Kelton knew that his bond with Ilara Voss complicated his leadership. Whispers followed him now. Cautious glances lingered. In response, he began taking her with him on brief scouting journeys into the high country. partly to keep her away from Drake's simmering hostility, but also to show her the land that shaped his people. It was during one such journey, seated atop a broad mesa with the world falling away beneath them, that Kelton spoke of what lay ahead. "The reservation cannot be avoided forever," he said, his eyes fixed on the distant line where earth met sky. "Each season, more of my people surrender. They see no other way to live." "Would you ever consider it?" Alara asked carefully, knowing how deeply he despised the thought of confinement. Kelton's jaw tightened. "To live as prisoners, to depend on army rations that arrive late or not at all, to watch our children dragged to schools where they are beaten for speaking their own tongue." He shook his head once. "I would rather die fighting." "There has to be another way," Alara said quietly, resting her hand on his arm. "A road between surrender and annihilation." He covered her hand with his own, the rough warmth of his palm grounding her. "Perhaps," he said, though doubt edged his voice. "But who would help us find it? The army wants obedience or extinction. The Dustreach folk want our land." Alara was silent for a long moment, gathering the courage to speak the thought that had been forming for days. "My father," she said at last. "Roic Voss has ties to territorial officials. He's respected among settlers. If he knew I was alive, if he understood what I've seen here." She stopped, watching the emotions cross Kelton's face, hope, caution, and something close to fear. "You wish to return to him," he said, his tone carefully even. "Not alone," Alara answered at once. "Together, to build a bridge no one believes can exist." The weight of the idea settled between them. A white trader's daughter and an Apache war chief standing before territorial authorities side by side. It was unheard of, perhaps unthinkable. "They would kill me on sight," Kelton said after a long pause, "or chain me until the rope was ready." "Not if we're careful," Alara insisted, her resolve strengthening as she spoke. "My father's trading post was neutral ground. Apache, settler, anyone could come in peace. What if we created something like that again?" "A sanctuary," Kelton said slowly, a trace of bitterness in his voice. "Like the one my people barely hold on to in these mountains." "But one recognized by both sides," Alara pressed. "A place for trade, for words instead of blood. The path you spoke of, between surrender and destruction." Kelton studied her face, searching for doubt and finding none. "You truly believe this can be done?" "I believe we have to try," she said simply. "For your people. For us." For the first time, they both understood that what had grown between them reached beyond the personal. It carried the weight of consequence, of possibility. Before Kelton could speak again, a sharp bird call echoed from below. A signal. His body went instantly taut as he moved to the mesa's edge, scanning the land beneath them. "Someone approaches," he said. After a tense moment, he turned back to Alara, disbelief flickering across his features. "Riders," he said. "3 of them. One of them is your father." The words struck Alara Voss like a gunshot. Her breath caught. "My father? Here? That's impossible." Kelton's gaze sharpened as he studied the riders below. "Then he tracks better than I believed," he said quietly. "Or someone helped him find us." The meaning was unmistakable. A message had been sent, from within the camp. Drake's hard, resentful face flashed through Alara's mind. Had this been his doing, summoning her father to drag her away? Or worse, luring Kelton into a trap? "We have to go down," she said urgently. "If that is my father, he could be killed by your scouts." Kelton gave a short nod. "Stay close to me. This will not be the reunion you imagine." They moved quickly, descending along a narrow trail known only to the Red Ash men. As they neared the base of the mesa, Kelton signaled the hidden scouts to hold their positions and remain unseen. Moments later, the riders emerged around a bend in the canyon. Roic Voss rode in front, his posture rigid with exhaustion and resolve. Behind him came Holt Granger, a familiar figure from the trading post, and beside them, a man in cavalry blue, Orson Pike, his insignia catching the light. Elara instinctively stepped forward, but Kelton's hand closed gently around her arm. "Wait," he murmured. "Let them speak first." The riders spotted them and reined in, stopping a short distance away. Roic Voss stared as though seeing a ghost. "Elara," he called, his voice breaking despite himself. "Is it really you?" "Yes, father," she answered, emotion rising fast. "I'm alive. I'm safe." Roic started to dismount, but Orson Pike caught his arm, his eyes never leaving Kelton. "That's Kelton," the sergeant said tightly, his hand drifting toward his revolver. "The most wanted Apache chief in the territory." "He saved my life," Elara said firmly, stepping closer to Kelton. "Without him, I would have died in the desert." Confusion crossed Roic's face as he took in her stance, the way Kelton stood slightly before her, protective without being possessive. "What is this?" he asked. "Are you his prisoner?" "No, father." The words came without hesitation. "I'm here by choice." Silence fell, heavy and charged. Roic Voss studied his daughter carefully. He saw it then. The change in her eyes, the calm strength in her posture, the unspoken bond between her and the Apache chief. "I think we need to talk," he said at last. "All of us." Orson Pike bristled. "Voss, I didn't ride out here to negotiate with a man responsible for raids and dead settlers." "And I appreciate your help, Sergeant," Roic replied evenly, "but my daughter is standing here alive, telling me this man saved her. That earns him the right to speak." An hour later, something unthinkable took shape. Beneath a small grove near the mesa's base, a fire burned low as an unprecedented council formed. Roic Voss, Orson Pike, and Holt Granger sat opposite Kelton and Elara. The air between them felt thick with old blood and older lies. It was Elara who finally broke the silence. She told them everything, of the attack on the trading post, her flight into the desert, Kelton finding her when death was close, the journey to the Apache stronghold, and what she had seen there. The hunger, the loss, the people fighting not for conquest, but for survival. "The stories we tell about each other," she said quietly, "are wrong, or at least incomplete. Zon." And as the fire crackled between them, every man present understood that something had shifted, fragile, dangerous, and impossible to undo. "They aren't the whole truth, father," Elara said quietly, finishing her account. "I've seen it myself. The Apache fight because they're cornered." She held her ground as the words settled. "Their children starve on reservations or are taken from them. Their hunting lands vanish year by year." "And the settlers?" Holt Granger cut in sharply. "The families killed in raids, the stagecoaches burned. Was that forced on us too? Some raids are carried out by young men I cannot always restrain," Kelton said at last, his voice calm but weighted. "Others are by those who have lost wives, children, and hope, and see vengeance as the only future left." He shifted his gaze deliberately to Orson Pike. "And some attacks blamed on my people were never ours at all." The sergeant stiffened. "What exactly are you implying?" "That soldiers have struck isolated homesteads while dressed as Apache," Kelton replied without hesitation. "My scouts have found proof. Blue coat buttons beside the dead, army horseshoes in the tracks." Roic Voss frowned deeply. "That's a grave accusation. Why would the army do such a thing?" Because peace weakens military control, Kelton answered. Peace brings settlers. Settlers bring civilian rule, and the army loses its grip. That's a lie, Orson Pike snapped. Is it? Elara asked softly. Father, do you remember the Wagner family? Their farm was attacked last spring. Before Mr. Wagner died, he told you the raiders spoke English to each other when they thought no one could hear. Rowick's face darkened as the memory returned. I reported it to the fort. Nothing was ever done. Silence pressed in around the fire. Each man felt it. The uneasy realization that the bloodshed between Apache and settler might not only be inevitable conflict, but something carefully fed and sustained. What are you proposing? Rowick finally asked, looking from his daughter to Kelton. Elara met Kelton's eyes, drawing strength from his steady presence. A different beginning, she said. Rebuild the trading post, but as neutral ground. A place where Apache and settlers can meet without guns. Fair trade. Talk instead of blood. Impossible, Granger scoffed. No settler would trust an Apache to keep the peace. And no Apache would trust settlers or soldiers to honor their word, Kelton replied evenly. Yet here we sit, speaking instead of killing, because one woman chose to look beyond fear. All eyes turned to Elara, standing between two worlds that had shaped the territory's long violence. It won't be easy, she said, but continuing as we have guarantees only more graves. My father's trading post was once respected by all. It can be again. Rowick studied her closely, seeing not the daughter he had lost, but a woman hardened and clarified by survival. Then he looked to Kelton, weighing him with the judgment of a man seasoned by the frontier. My daughter trusts you, Rowick said at last. That carries weight with me. And her courage carries weight with me, Kelton answered without hesitation. Between them, something fragile took root. Not friendship, not yet, but the first hint of mutual respect. Orson Pike remained wary, but doubt had crept into his certainty, and once doubt took hold, it could not easily be driven out. Holt Granger, whose brother had fallen in an Apache raid years earlier, still carried open hostility in his posture. Yet even he seemed unsettled by what lay before him. A white woman standing shoulder to shoulder with an Apache chief, speaking with calm resolve about a road neither side had ever dared to imagine. As the council stretched into the afternoon, ideas that would have been dismissed as madness only hours earlier began to take fragile shape. The trading post would rise again. This time, its neutrality would be sworn by Kelton's authority and upheld by Rowick Voss's hard-earned reputation. Kelton would share intelligence about splinter bands that no longer answered to Apache leadership. Rowick, in turn, would press territorial officials to ensure that supplies promised to Reservation Apache actually reached them, instead of vanishing into corrupt hands. "And what of you?" Rowick finally asked, voicing the question that had hovered unspoken since the talks began. "Where do you see yourselves in all of this?" Elara felt Kelton's hand close around hers, a quiet gesture that drew every eye. "We stand between worlds," she said steadily. "Maybe that's exactly where we belong." The meaning of her words lingered in the air, reaching beyond trade routes and fragile truces. Elara Voss, daughter of a respected frontier trader, had bound her future to Kelton, war chief of the Apache. The truth struck Rowick hard. Conflict flickered across his weathered face, but as he studied his daughter's certainty, her strength, something shifted. "The world won't make this easy," he said at last, his voice rough. "Not for either of you. When has the frontier ever been kind to women who choose their own path?" Elara replied softly, a trace of the old shared humor between them. "Or to chiefs who choose peace over war." As the sun dipped toward the western ridges, long shadows stretching across the land, the unlikely council came to its end. No parchment bore signatures. No official seal marked the moment. Yet something unprecedented had occurred. A first, fragile crossing over the divide that had soaked the territory in blood for decades. When the three visitors prepared to leave, Roic pulled his daughter into a fierce embrace. "Come home when you're ready," he murmured. "Both of you, build something new from the ashes." Tears stung Alara's eyes. It was not full approval, but it was blessing enough. They watched the riders disappear into the deepening dusk. Kelton slipped an arm around Alara's waist, drawing her close. "Your father is an uncommon man," he said quietly. "Now I know where your courage was born." "He surprised me too," Alara admitted, resting against him. "I never thought he could see past what he was taught." "Few men can," Kelton said. "It is a rare strength." Silence settled between them, heavy yet peaceful, as the weight of the day finally eased. The future they had dared to imagine remained fragile, perhaps even impossible, in a land shaped by hatred and fear. Yet for the first time, hope felt real. "What happens now?" Alara asked softly. Kelton turned to her, his expression steady and sincere in the fading light. "That depends on what you desire, Alara Voss." She met his gaze without hesitation. "I want what everyone says cannot exist. I want a life where I don't have to choose between worlds." Kelton lifted his hand slowly, his palm resting against her cheek with a tenderness that contradicted the strength of a man shaped by war. "Then we will build that life," he said quietly, "stone by stone." Under the silver wash of the desert evening, their mouths met in a kiss that defied bloodlines and old hatred, a vow formed not in words, but in shared resolve. Two souls who had recognized each other across a history of violence now bound themselves to the work of creating something entirely new. The road ahead promised resistance from every side, the weight of memory, and the relentless pull of a land trained to distrust peace. Yet as Alara Voss and Kelton stood beneath the vast western sky, they knew their meeting had never been chance. It was a beginning shaped by forces larger than either of them, one that might, through endurance and courage, reshape not only their lives, but the fate of a territory long soaked in blood. 5 years later, the trading post at the crossroads stood as living proof of what many had sworn could never exist. Rising from the ashes of Roic Voss's old store, it was no longer merely a place of barter. It had become a symbol, fragile, contested, yet real, of a peace still finding its footing. The sign above the door read, "Voss and Son Trading Company," though those who knew the truth understood that the son was Kelton himself. His union with Alara had scandalized some, enraged others, and inspired more than anyone dared admit. Their marriage, sealed first by Apache rites beneath open sky, then quietly recorded by a forward-thinking territorial judge, stood as the most visible bridge between two worlds that had once known only fire and fear. On a warm summer morning, a small boy of 4 winters raced across the packed earth of the yard, his laughter carrying on the dry breeze. His skin held the warm bronze of his father's people, his hair fell in pale waves like his mother's, and his dark eyes reflected both. Cale Voss, named for lineage on both sides, chased a wooden hoop with fierce determination. From the porch's shade, Alara watched him while cradling their second child, a 6-month-old daughter with solemn eyes already sharp with awareness. Naira Voss, named in honor of Sarah, the medicine woman who had guided Alara and crossed into the spirit world the winter before, slept quietly against her mother's chest. She was the continuation of a story no one had believed could endure. Nearby, Roic Voss, his hair now silvered, his hands still steady, carved a small wooden horse for his grandson. The man who had once come searching with fear in his heart had become one of the fiercest advocates for the fragile coexistence his daughter embodied. His standing among dust-reach folk, paired with hard-earned trust from territorial officials, had helped turn vision into something tangible. "Papa's coming!" Cale shouted suddenly, abandoning his game as riders crested the rise. Kelton dismounted in a single fluid motion and swept his son into his arms. Time had etched a few lines into his face, but his presence remained unshaken. The change lay in his eyes. Where once there had been only the relentless focus of a war chief, there now lived the measured clarity of a man who had learned the cost of peace. Behind him rode 3 Apache men and 2 settlers, members of the council that now met regularly to resolve disputes before blood could be spilled. Among them was Tovan, once Kelton's most doubtful lieutenant, now a steady voice for cooperation without surrendering Apache identity. "The accords will stand," Kelton said as he stepped onto the porch, kissing Ilara's temple and brushing his fingers across Naira's cheek. "The new governor has signed." It had taken years to reach that moment. There had been betrayals, renegade violence, broken promises, and powerful men who profited from chaos. Yet, piece by fragile piece, trust had taken root. And at the crossroads, where Ilara Voss and Kelton had refused to choose between worlds, the impossible had learned how to endure. Orson Pike, once a hard-edged sergeant and now serving under Colonel Bram Calder, the regional military commander, arrived not long after, dismounting and stepping onto the porch with a measured nod. Years earlier, Pike's suspicion toward Kelton had been absolute. Time, evidence, and conscience had changed that. His own investigation had confirmed what Kelton had claimed from the beginning. Certain soldiers had staged false raids, wearing Apache signs to justify harsher campaigns. The exposure of that corruption had led to courts-martial, public disgrace, and a long-overdue reshaping of military authority across the territory. "Washington finally ratified the boundaries," Bram Calder announced. "Apache lands are now recognized under federal law." Roic Voss gave a low, satisfied grunt. Only took them 5 years to learn sense. Not all resistance had vanished. Drake, the warrior who had once burned with resentment toward Ilara's presence in the camp, had eventually broken away, leading a small band that rejected any path toward peace. They continued to raid dust-reach folk settlements, clinging to vengeance as their only future. On the other side, hardliners among the settlers, men like Holt Granger, still insisted that the Apache could only be subdued or erased. Yet voices like theirs, once loud and dominant, had steadily become fewer as cooperation proved its worth. The trading post at the crossroads welcomed anyone who came in peace, settlers, soldiers, and Red Ash men alike. Behind it stood a home shaped by 2 traditions, where Ilara Voss and Kelton lived in a union that challenged convention and deepened with each passing season. As evening settled and the council riders departed, Kelton reached for his son's hand. "Come, Cale," he said. "Today I teach you to read the ground." The boy's face lit with excitement. At 4 winters old, Cale Voss spoke both English and Apache with ease, crossing cultures as naturally as breathing, never having learned that the world expected them to remain divided. Later, as the desert cooled and shadows lengthened, Ilara saw Kelton and Cale returning from the hills. Pride softened her husband's features, and Cale clutched a small rabbit track cast in clay. His first true sign, his first proof. That night, after Cale and little Naira slept, Ilara and Kelton walked together beneath a sky crowded with stars. It had become their ritual, this quiet time at day's end. "Do you ever wonder," Ilara asked softly, "what would have happened if you hadn't found me in that canyon?" Kelton considered the question, as he always did, with care. "I would have kept fighting," he said at last. "Until death took me, by blade, by bullet, or behind reservation fences, and many others with me." Ilara tightened her grip on his hand. "And I would have lived only half a life," she said, "never knowing what could exist." They stopped at the edge of their land, gazing out over the moonlit desert, the same unforgiving ground that had nearly claimed her, and now carried their shared purpose. "I remember how afraid I was," Ilara murmured, "not just of you, but of everything the frontier meant. Violence, loss, survival. And now?" Kelton asked, drawing her close. She looked up at the man whose face had become as familiar as her own. The proud lines their son already carried, the deep eyes that had first held hers across fire and smoke. "Now I know the real frontier was never the land," she said. "It was the space between hearts that seemed too different to meet." "And we crossed it," Kelton said quietly. He kissed her, the same fire still alive after all these years. "And we keep crossing it," he added, "every day." They turned back toward their home, where their children slept beneath the shared shelter of two worlds, learning, slowly, imperfectly, to live as one. "I finally found you." Words first spoken in fire and fear, now fulfilled in ways neither Ilara Voss nor Kelton could have foreseen. In finding each other, they had uncovered something rarer than peace, a way to mend wounds long believed beyond healing. Not all dangers had vanished, and the future still carried uncertainty, but each passing season brought new understanding, new allies, and quieter nights beneath open skies. Behind the trading post, children ran together through drifting dust, Apache and Dust Reach folk side by side, growing up with stories their parents had never known. Stories shaped not by hatred or vengeance, but by shared work, shared laughter, and the belief that difference did not have to mean division. The crossroads stood as living proof that courage could outlast fear, and that respect, once planted, could take root even in the harshest ground. The desert remained vast and unforgiving, just as it had always been. Yet within it, something had changed. The land no longer marked only borders between enemies, but pathways between lives once kept apart. Ilara and Kelton walked those paths together, day after day, not because the way was easy, but because it was right. The future was unwritten. Storms would come, old resentments would stir, but they would meet whatever lay ahead as they had met everything before. Side by side, bridging worlds with steady hands and open hearts, and beneath the same desert stars that had once watched a frightened woman flee into darkness, a family now slept in peace, carrying forward a promise born from fire, tested by sacrifice, and sustained by love. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. We appreciate you more than you think. If this tale stirred something deep inside, we invite you to remain part of this frontier of memories. More true stories of honor, compassion, and destiny are waiting for you here. Subscribe, share, comment, and thank you for riding with us today. Aviso legal bara disclaimer. Our content is designed for artistic and entertainment purposes and may reinterpret historical themes using fictional touches. We apply AI tools thoughtfully, only to support production, while keeping human supervision over editing, emotional tone, and narrative coherence. We always comply with regulatory guidelines for AI-based media and avoid deepfake practices or identity manipulation. All supporting components remain legally sourced. Please ask for authorization before sharing or adapting any segment. Your respect makes it possible for us to continue telling meaningful stories.